In April of 1532, the busy, bustling streets of Smithfield were crammed with swathes of people baying for the blood of a murderer. After minutes of raucous roaring, the salivating mass finally got what they came for, except no blood had been spilt. Instead, the murderer was hanged within an inch of his life. Then, the man crumbled on the floor, panting like a dog as veins bulged underneath his skin. Yet, his punishment was far from over. He was then chained up to a gibbet before being dunked into a cauldron of boiling water. For 2 agonizing hours, the murderer was lowered into the searing pot. At first, his flesh started to bubble. By the end of the ordeal, his entire body had dissolved into a gelatinous gloop. The crowd, who had previously been baying for blood, left the streets of Smithfield, shocked at what they'd seen before them. The man, named Richard Roose, was executed in these cruel circumstances under the order of Henry VIII. So, who was Richard Roose, and what callous crime did he commit to deserve such a fearsome fate? Little is known of the life of Richard Roose. In fact, his surname may not even be Roose at all. What's more certain is his profession. He was a cook. In April of 1531, Roose was cooking for the Bishop of Rochester, John Fisher, as well as over a dozen of Fisher's guests. Over the years, Fisher became a close ally of Henry VIII. He helped to educate Henry in his younger years and officiated the funeral of Henry's grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, and his father, Henry VII. However, by the mid-1520s, Henry and Fisher's relations became strained. Around 1525, Henry had fallen in love with Anne Boleyn, but to marry Anne, the king had to first divorce his current wife, Catherine of Aragon. Henry tried to get his marriage to Catherine annulled by the Pope, but this was rejected, a decision that led Henry to split from the Catholic Church and become the supreme head of the Church in England. Being a Catholic, John Fisher was, unsurprisingly, bitterly disappointed by Henry's reckless actions. Back to April of 1531, while Fisher and his guests were waiting for their food, Roose was meddling with the recipe. Supposedly, he'd added white powder to the porridge. Whether he was fasting or not hungry, Fisher didn't eat the porridge. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for everyone. 17 of those who ate the porridge quickly became violently ill. Tragically, 2 became so unwell they soon perished. Suspicion quickly fell upon the kitchen staff, and specifically Roose, whose arrest was immediately ordered. Despite escaping the city, the cook was swiftly captured before being brought to the Tower of London. As Roose toiled over his fate in the damp, gloomy cell he was confined to, rumours swirled over the case. For many, Anne Boleyn was the puppet master, paying or forcing Roose to poison the porridge in an attempt to kill sympathiser of Catherine of Aragon, John Fisher. Another theory emerged, citing Henry as the instigator. After all, he and Fisher's relationship was strained after the king's break from the Catholic Church. While at the Tower of London, Roose was tortured on a rack. As his joints dislocated and his muscle fibres started to tear, the chef admitted to adding a white powder to the meal. Roose believed the white powder was simply a laxative, intended for use as part of a practical joke on the diners. Whether Roose had an odd sense of humour or he was lying to cover up part of a more sinister plot, we will never know. Regardless of Roose's reasons, Henry VIII had heard enough. He wanted to ensure the cook faced the most gruesome punishment possible, either due to the king's paranoid fear of being poisoned himself, or due to his determination to cover his or Anne's bloody tracks. Roose's grim fate was sealed. 2 people were dead, yet Henry was unwilling to settle for a manslaughter or murder charge. He wanted something far more striking to descend upon Roose. But this would only be possible with a worse charge than murder. In the 16th century, the only charge worse than murder was treason. Henry's conniving solution was simple. He would expand the definition of treason to include poisoning. An Act of Poisoning Bill was passed through the Houses of Parliament with ease. Now, murder by poisoning was an act of treason. The punishment for such a crime? Being boiled alive. On the 15th of April 1532, an anticipatory crowd filled the streets of Smithfield in London to witness the execution of the treasonist. While roars and shouts filled the air, Roose was chained up and tied to a pulley system which dangled him above the ground. He was hanged, close to death, before cruelly being kept alive. But he and the crowd knew that hanging was not his final fate. Below Roose was a cauldron filled with bubbling, boiling water. As he was lowered closer, he tried to squirm and wriggle his way out, but to no avail. One witness remarked, "He roared mighty loud," and women did feel sick at the sight of what they saw and were carried away half dead. Whether it was the sight of the victim's bubbling flesh or his piercing screams, the execution quickly shocked all those who gathered to watch it. Worse yet though, it wouldn't be a swift death. Over a period of 2 hours, Roose was lowered into the boiling water. The punishment was intended to be as long as it took the cook to prepare the poisonous porridge. It's not known how long it took for Roose to meet his end. One thing's for certain, by the end of 2 hours, his corpse would have been a gooey mess. England had seen one of its worst punishments ever dealt, and it was all due to a man putting laxatives in porridge. Forgettable as Roose's life may have been before the 1530s, his role in the murder of 2 people and resulting execution have stamped his story into the history books forevermore. Aside from Roose's demise, this tale also gave the English people a preeminent sign of the brutality of their king. Whether Henry showed such fearsome force to cover his and Anne's tracks, or due to his paranoia of poisoning, we'll never know. Interestingly, just 3 years after Roose was boiled alive, Henry ordered the execution of John Fisher too. If there's one thing this torturous tale tells us, it's that the years of Henry VIII's rule were a turbulent, tyrannical time when absolutely no one was safe from injustice.